Picture this. A missile is flying, not just any missile, a nuclear-powered one. And it's been in the air for 15 hours, 14,000 kilometers. That's the distance from Moscow to New York and back again, with fuel to spare. The date? Earlier this week. The name? Burevestnik. In English, storm petrel, a seabird that flies over the most treacherous oceans, never landing, fighting the storm. Russian President Vladimir Putin appeared on television in military fatigues to announce this test. His message was clear: a unique weapon with near unlimited range. Our nuclear deterrent is at its highest level. But here's what the headlines missed. This isn't just about a missile. This is about the Arctic. This is about who controls the top of the world. And this is about a chess game being played on ice that will reshape global power for the next century. Welcome to Eagle's View. Today, we're going beyond the talking heads, beyond the fear-mongering, beyond the propaganda from all sides. We're connecting the dots that no one else wants you to see. Let's start with what actually happened. Russia announced a successful test of its 9M730 Burevestnik missile. According to official statements, it flew for approximately 15 hours, covering 14,000 kilometers. Now, before we get into the why, let's understand the what. Most missiles work like this. They burn fuel, they fly, fuel runs out, they fall or hit the target. Simple. The Burevestnik is different. It uses a small nuclear reactor. Imagine a miniature nuclear power plant that heats air and propels the missile forward. As long as the reactor runs, the missile can theoretically fly indefinitely. Think of it this way. A normal car has a gas tank. When it's empty, you stop. This is like a car that generates its own fuel as it drives. It could circle the planet again and again and again. So, what do the experts say about this? One Western analyst told us the system is intended to defeat missile defense. Because it can fly for basically unlimited range, it can fly around defenses. On the other hand, you could build more defenses or you could use aircraft to intercept them. Basically, you would need to fly after the missile, chase it. I don't think the system is invincible. Another one noted, we're seeing countries use nuclear threats more and more to get their way in the world. While these programs have existed for years, if not decades, the reason Putin is doing this on live TV while wearing military fatigues is because he wants to send a certain message. And here is the skeptic's view. One analyst put it bluntly. It's true that only Russia has been crazy enough to actually build one of these things, but it doesn't mean Russia is the only country that could build such a thing. It's just other countries have thought better of it. Why? Because nuclear-powered cruise missiles are extremely dangerous to test, environmentally hazardous, politically provocative, and technically challenging. Russia has suffered several catastrophic failures during Burevestnik tests, including a deadly explosion in 2019 that killed scientists and released radiation. So, why now? Why announce this test with such fanfare? To understand that, we need to look north, far north, to the Arctic. For most of human history, the Arctic was irrelevant. Too cold, too remote, too hostile. The few people who lived there survived on the margins, and great powers mostly ignored it, right? But something has changed. Two somethings, actually. First, the ice is melting. Climate change, whatever your politics about it, is physically opening new territory. Shipping routes that were frozen year-round are now navigable for months at a time. Resources that were locked under ice are now becoming accessible. The Northern Sea Route along Russia's Arctic coast can cut shipping time from Asia to Europe by 40% compared to the Suez Canal. That's not theoretical. That is billions of dollars. That's geopolitical leverage. Second, what's under the ice? The Arctic contains 13% of the world's undiscovered oil, 30% of undiscovered natural gas, and massive rare earth mineral deposits. The stuff that's essential for electronics, weapons, and green technology. Fish stocks are shifting northward as oceans warm. Greenland alone has rare earth reserves that could challenge China's current monopoly. That's not just economics, that's technological sovereignty. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Really interesting. 8 countries have territory in the Arctic Circle: Russia, Canada, United States, Denmark via Greenland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland. Look at that list. Notice something? 7 of those 8 are NATO members or close Western allies. Only one, Russia, stands outside that bloc. From Moscow's perspective, they are being encircled in the Arctic. From Washington's perspective, they are securing democratic allies' territory. From Beijing's perspective, well, that's where things get really interesting. China is not an Arctic nation. The closest point of China to the Arctic Circle is 1,400 kilometers away. But in 2018, Beijing declared itself a near-Arctic state and published its first Arctic policy. The strategy is clear. Invest in Russian Arctic energy projects, build ice-capable cargo ships, establish research stations, and push the Polar Silk Road concept as part of Belt and Road Initiative. Translation? China wants access to Arctic routes and resources, but can only get them by partnering with Russia, the one Arctic power that's outside the Western Bloc. And this is where the Burevestnik missile test clicks into place. While Russia was testing its nuclear-powered cruise missile, the West wasn't sitting idle. In fact, the last 3 years have seen an explosion of Arctic activity from Western allies. In 2024, the United States, Canada, and Finland announced the Ice Pact, a trilateral agreement to rapidly expand icebreaker production. Why? What's the goal? Counter Russian and Chinese influence in the Arctic. Let's talk numbers for a second. Russia has about 40 operational icebreakers, including nuclear-powered vessels. China has between 5 and 7 icebreakers and is building more. The United States has 2 heavy icebreakers. Canada has between 6 and 8 vessels. The Ice Pact aims to change that by pooling design, production, and operational capabilities. Finland brings Arctic expertise. The US brings industrial scale. Canada brings Arctic sovereignty claims. But it's not just about icebreakers. Canada recently announced $27.7 million in research and infrastructure investments specifically for the Arctic. That might sound modest, but it's part of a larger pattern. Enhanced surveillance and satellite monitoring, northern community infrastructure that serves both civilian and military purposes, climate research stations that also work as sovereignty markers, and defense installations. The West isn't building icebreakers for fun. They are establishing control over specific shipping corridors. There is the Northwest Passage through the Canadian Arctic archipelago. Canada claims this as internal waters. The US insists it's an international strait, so there is disagreement even between the allies. Then there is a transpolar route over the North Pole, currently mostly theoretical, but as ice retreats, it becomes viable. There is no clear legal framework for who controls that. And then Northern Sea Route along the Russian coast. Russia controls and regulates this. Western ships must pay fees and follow Russian rules. This is Russia's Arctic leverage. Here's the key change. Western military thinking has shifted. The Arctic is no longer just a remote research zone or a territorial footnote. NATO's cold response exercises now regularly include 30,000 plus troops training in the Arctic conditions. Finland's accession to NATO in 2023 added 1,340 kilometers of NATO-Russian Arctic border. The Arctic has become a strategic domain. There is another layer here that's often overlooked: indigenous and northern communities. Western Arctic strategy increasingly incorporates indigenous participation, not just for ethics, but for legal and political leverage. International law gives weight to effective occupation, and indigenous communities provide that continuous presence. Canada's Arctic strategy explicitly links indigenous rights with sovereignty claims. The message: our people have lived here for thousands of years. This is our territory under international law. This isn't cynical, it's smart. It combines legitimate rights with strategic interests, but also means Arctic indigenous communities are being positioned as frontline actors in great power competition, whether they want that or not. Now let's look at what Russia and its partners are doing. While the West builds icebreakers and Arctic bases, Russia and its partners are building something else: an alternative Arctic order. After Western sanctions intensified in 2022, Russia faced a dilemma. Its Arctic projects, massive LNG facilities, undersea pipelines, mining operations, suddenly had no Western partners and limited financing. Moscow's solution? Go east, go south, go BRICS. Russian official statements now explicitly talk about actively developing contacts with BRICS and SCO countries on the Arctic. Here's a fascinating detail. Russia is planning to establish a BRICS Arctic Science Center, possibly in Pyramiden, Svalbard. Pyramiden is a ghost town, a former Soviet coal mining settlement that was abandoned in 1998. It's on Svalbard, which is Norwegian territory, but under the Svalbard Treaty, any signatory nation can establish research operations there. Translation: Russia can create a BRICS foothold on NATO member territory, completely legally, and there is nothing Norway can do about it beyond monitoring activities. This isn't just science. It's about establishing presence, building legitimacy for non-Western actors in Arctic affairs, creating infrastructure that can serve multiple purposes, and sending a message: the Arctic isn't just the West's playground. Let's follow the money. China has invested billions in Russian Arctic LNG projects. China holds about 30% stake in Yamal LNG and has significant financing in Arctic LNG too. There is also the proposed Power of Siberia 2 pipeline that would connect Russian Arctic gas fields to China. These aren't just business deals. They are strategic partnerships that give Russia capital without Western banks, give China energy security from Arctic sources, tie both countries' interests in keeping Arctic routes open, and create infrastructure that bypasses traditional choke points like the Strait of Hormuz, Malacca Strait, and Suez Canal. Here's where it gets geopolitical. China imports 70% of its oil and 40% of its natural gas. Almost all of it passes through maritime choke points that, in a conflict, could be blocked by the U.S. Navy. The Northern Sea Route offers an alternative. It's entirely under Russian control, far from the U.S. carrier groups, and shortens shipping time from Asia to Europe dramatically. For Russia, the NSR is leverage. For China, it's insurance. For both, it's an alternative to Western-dominated maritime order. It's not just Russia and China. India and Brazil are also being courted for Arctic involvement. India is participating in Arctic research and investing in Russian energy projects. Brazil has shown interests in rare earth minerals and shipping route access. The strategy is clear. Make the Arctic a multilateral space, not a West plus Russia binary. Create a BRICS Arctic agenda that gives legitimacy to non-traditional Arctic actors. Here's the fascinating paradox. Most BRICS countries have zero Arctic territory, but by partnering with Russia, the one Arctic power outside NATO, they gain access to resources, shipping routes, cold weather technology, and strategic leverage against Western dominance. It's a geopolitical workaround, and it's working. Missiles and military exercises are dramatic, but the real story is economics, because whoever controls the Arctic controls 30% of undiscovered gas, critical minerals like rare earths, and shipping routes that are 40% shorter than Suez. Now let's talk about what that means for the global economy. Europe used to get 40% of its natural gas from Russia via pipelines. After 2022, that dropped to near zero. Where does that gas go now? It's being redirected to Arctic LNG projects aimed at Asian markets, particularly China and India. This isn't just a European problem. It's a global market restructuring. The Arctic is becoming the bridge between Russian resources and Asian demand, cutting out Western intermediaries entirely. Here is a number that should terrify Western policymakers. China controls 90% of global rare earth refining. Rare earths are in everything: smartphones, electric cars, wind turbines, missiles, fighter jets. You can't build modern technology without them. Greenland has massive rare earth deposits. So does northern Canada. So do parts of Russian Arctic territory. The race is on. Can the West develop Arctic rare earth production fast enough to challenge Chinese monopoly, or will those deposits end up in BRICS' hands through investment and partnerships? Now let's talk about something boring that matters a lot: maritime insurance. If the Northern Sea Route becomes a viable alternative to Suez, insurance companies have to price risk differently. Shipping companies have to make route choices. Port cities have to adapt. Think about it. Rotterdam is Europe's largest port and is positioned for Suez traffic. If NSR takes 20% of Asia-Europe trade, Rotterdam loses billions. Arctic ports like Murmansk, Churchill, and Kirkenes gain value. Entire supply chains shift forward. This isn't hypothetical. Chinese shipping giant COSCO has already run experimental Arctic transits. Insurance giant Lloyd's of London is developing Arctic-specific coverage. The money is already moving. Here is the strange part. Western companies want Arctic access, but Western governments are locked in strategic competition with Russia and China over the Arctic. So you have a situation where Western energy companies want to invest in Arctic resources, but sanctions prevent working with Russia and strategic competition prevents Chinese partnerships. So money flows into higher risk, lower return Western Arctic projects, while BRICS partners move faster with fewer restrictions. The result? The Arctic is developing but along divided lines. Two separate economic blocks forming in parallel. One Arctic, two economies. So let's put it all together. Russia tests a nuclear-powered cruise missile with near unlimited range. On the surface, it's a message about military capability and deterrence. But look at the context. The West is rapidly militarizing and economically investing in the Arctic through the Ice Pact, NATO exercises, infrastructure, and indigenous partnerships. Russia and China are building an alternative Arctic order through energy projects, the Northern Sea Route, BRICS cooperation, and research presence. Global supply chains, energy flows, and resource access are being redrawn around Arctic geography, and climate change, the physical opening of Arctic ice, is accelerating all this, making what was theoretical subtly practical. The missile test isn't about the missile. It's about signaling capability and resolve in the Arctic domain. Think about it. A missile with unlimited range can circle the Arctic indefinitely, flying around NATO defenses, demonstrating presence over contested waters, and making any Arctic military installation potentially vulnerable. It can reach any point in the Arctic from any direction at any time for as long as needed. We're watching the birth of a new strategic domain. For 500 years, global power was about controlling warm water ports and tropical trade routes. The British Empire, Dutch East India Company, American Navy, all built on dominating the Suez, Hormuz, Malacca, and Panama canals. But the Arctic changes the equation. It offers alternative routes that bypass traditional choke points, resources in territories outside traditional zones of control, and strategic depth for both defense and power projection. The country or bloc that dominates the Arctic has options that others don't. That's why this matters. Looking ahead, we see three possible trajectories. First scenario, Cold War 2.0, complete bifurcation. NATO Arctic versus BRICS Arctic. Parallel infrastructure, duplicate research, militarized competition, high cost, high risk, low cooperation. Second scenario, pragmatic coexistence. Both blocs develop their spheres but maintain scientific cooperation, shared safety protocols, environmental standards. Think Antarctic Treaty model but with strategic competition underneath. Third scenario, crisis-driven escalation. An incident, let's say a collision at sea or disputed resource claim, environmental disaster, forces rapid militarization. The Arctic becomes a flashpoint for wider conflict. Which future we get depends on decisions being made right now in Beijing, Washington, Moscow, Ottawa, Brussels, Delhi, and Brasilia. So, when you see the next headlines about a Russian missile test or a new NATO exercise or Chinese Arctic investment, let's remember, it's not about their individual story. It's about a complete reorganization of global strategic geography. The Arctic is where the future is being written, not in dramatic battles, but in icebreaker contracts, LNG terminals, research stations, and shipping lane negotiations. For citizens, businesses, and governments, here's what to watch. 1. Icebreaker fleet expansion. Who builds capacity fastest wins operational advantage. 2. LNG and mineral deals. Follow the money to see who's gaining economic access. 3. Legal and sovereignty disputes. Shipping lanes, exclusive economic zone claims, maritime law battles. 4. Technology innovation, cold region tech, remote operations, Arctic hardened equipment. Which middle powers align with which blocs? The talking heads will argue about whether the missile is invincible or whether Putin is bluffing. They will miss the point. The real story is that the Arctic, frozen, remote, inhospitable for all of human history, is now the most contested space on Earth. Whoever controls it doesn't just have the military advantage. They have economic freedom, strategic depth, options that others don't have. That's the New World Order, not an ideology, not a treaty, a geography. This has been Eagle's Eye. We see what the others overlook. We connect what others separate. We tell you not just what happened, but what it means. Until next time, look up, look north, see the whole picture. The future is being built on ice.